So it is a privilege and an honor to have him here with us today. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Hideo Kojima and assistant producer Sean Eystone. So I want to ask you first, have you had the opportunity to tour the exhibition?
So yes, during the opening ceremony 2 days ago, actually, we had the pleasure of looking around the exhibition, and we saw a lot of cool games. I think it does a really good job of explaining the history behind video games. A lot of interesting games there, as well as old hardware, which was really great to see, and it brought back a lot of memories. So of course, I've had the honor of having my games displayed in exhibitions around the world, but to have it shown here at a place like the Smithsonian is truly an honor, and I think it's a very important step because Smithsonian is such a respected museum, and it encompasses so many different fields, including art, technology, and all these various museums. So having games be a part of that, recognized as a sort of art form, to me, I think is a very important thing, and I'm very happy to be a part of that. Thank you very much. And for a very long time, just the Smithsonian in general, I've been looking forward to looking at the National Air and Space Museum since I was a child. So I'm really looking forward to going there after this is all done and taking a look at some of the moon rocks brought back by Apollo, looking at the Enola Gay, Chuck Yeager's X-1, things like that. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So we all have experiences of when we first saw a video game that was important. Can you tell us a bit about your first experience with video games, and what was the first game that you played?
So, when I was a child, there really weren't very many video games, but I do have memories of
Pong no.
maybe it was Pong, but it's for a home system in Japan, so maybe it wasn't the real Pong. Maybe it was just sort of a Japanese game that was similar to Pong. But I think the game that really first pulled me in and I played a lot was probably Space Invaders. And I remember seeing it first on the news, on TV, and being very impressed by it, thinking, wow, this kind of thing actually exists. And then it came to a supermarket near my house, and when I was a junior high school student, I went there and played it a lot. But if we go back a little bit further, maybe even before video games, I remember as a kid, when my parents would go shopping, there was a place, a department store, that on the top floor had a bunch of mechatronic arcade games, things like race cars that would run on a conveyor belt, or these games where you shoot down ships, and it's kind of like a shadow play, right? And you're shooting things down. Mm-hmm. And we used to go there a lot. My parents would just give me some money, and me and my brother would go there.
At what point did you decide that you wanted to make video games, and why? Specifically, were there any other forms of media that you wanted to develop in? Did you ever want to write stories, plays, movies?
So, to be honest, what I really wanted to become was a movie director. But of course, back then it wasn't as easy as filming a movie and editing it digitally like you can do now, or distributing online via the web. So it wasn't very easy for me to film my own works. So, I remember just kind of stressing over this fact, how can I become successful in the movie industry? So what I decided to do was, do what I could do by myself, which was write books, novels. So I thought that, maybe the best way to do this would be to write a novel on my own, then have it maybe picked up. Like, there's a success story with Sylvester Stallone where he wrote Rocky himself, and it became very successful. So I wanted to aim for something like that. But then, while I was doing this, trying to write my novel, then the Super Famicom, known as the Nintendo Entertainment System, here, was released. So when the Famicom came out, I became addicted to it right away. And I started playing all these games and just kind of became obsessed with it. And it's at that time that I really felt the potential that was hidden in this new medium. And I felt that maybe if I can't go to movies, I could look into this new medium and find success there.
Can you discuss where you draw your inspiration from when you are designing games? Specifically, can you detail for us perhaps some of the influence behind the anti-war and nuclear proliferation themes that are woven throughout the Metal Gear series? And why was it so important for you to have these messages in your games?
So, in a movie, you're basically watching things on a screen, and it presents a story and a world to you, but you're just looking at it as an observer. So what I thought is, how would it feel if you could actually interact with these elements? And I think providing that experience of actually being there while these events are happening is the basics of good game design. So, for example, in the movie The Great Escape, there's that scene where McQueen's trying to escape from the Nazi camp, and he kind of gets, you're wondering if he's going to get spotted, and there's a lot of tension there. And just watching it on screen, watching the action unfold, you feel a lot of tension just as an observer. So I wondered, well, what would it be like if you were actually there? What if I could simulate this somehow in a game and have it be interactive? And it's that kind of goal. That's where I start my game designs from, is looking at an experience and try to recreate that experience and create my game designs from there. So another example would be if you're watching a vampire movie, and the main characters are fighting, and they have to hold off the vampires until dawn comes, right? And there's that tension there, and you're wondering, wow, are they going to make it? You're waiting for the sun to rise, and when the sun finally does rise, you feel very happy and relieved when that happens. And it was that type of experience that I wanted to simulate when I created Boktai. And so that's basically how I approach my games, is not so much to look at the story or world that's presented in a movie, but to recreate those situations and those experiences. And as for the anti-nuclear messages that are found in my games, this actually goes back to my parents, because my parents were born in the 1930s, and they experienced the air raids on Tokyo. So I got a lot of influence from them, and I think inherited a lot of that anti-war sentiment from them. And so when I went into the game industry and I started making my own games, I really want to carry over this message of anti-war, anti-nuclear proliferation into my games.
In your experience, what are some of the qualities that you believe are required to be a good game designer?
First of all, I think you have to have a lot of different interests, be interested in a lot of many things, and be willing to jump in and try new things. So say if you're walking along the street and you see a bunch of people in the middle of the street, you have to be the type of person who wants to go there and see what's going on. I think if you don't have that spirit of curiosity, then I don't think you can become a good game designer. And of course, since games run on technology, I think you have to have, to a certain extent, an interest in technology and the latest technological trends. And I think from a creative aspect, somebody who's interested in the latest visual trends, stories, music, and other artistic type of topics is probably well suited to becoming a game designer. But I think above all that, what's really important is what we call in Japan the spirit of omotenashi, which is kind of like a spirit of hospitality, or the spirit of wanting to give something to someone or share an experience with someone. So I think it's that spirit of hospitality, of wanting to share an experience and give an experience to someone else, that's very important. And to think about how you can make other people have fun and be willing to sacrifice yourself to make that fun apparent to other people. So I think somebody who's very interested in all this technology and willing to sacrifice themselves to make other people happy, I think those are the people who are well suited to becoming a game designer.
Okay. We're talking about the games that you've worked on, but I want you to, if you could, to name a game other than one you developed that has had a profound impact on you, and why.
Well, first of all, I just have to say that probably the most influential game on me was Super Mario Brothers. I think if that game did not exist, I probably would not be sitting here today. But there is also a game that, after I entered the game industry, something that stood out to me and really impressed me. And that game would be a game called Another World, which I believe is called Out of This World here in North America. And it was a polygon-based game released way back when, and that really impressed me a lot. Is there anyone in the audience who's played it?
Oh.
So I think what it did is it really did a great job of conveying the creator's style, his will, and his artistic sense, and that aesthetic value through all parts of the game, from the aesthetics to even just, the type of gimmicks and puzzles that were in the game. And I think he did a great job of conveying that message to the player, and that really influenced me a lot, made me want to create a game that was similar to it.
Some artists struggle having to balance the commercial interest with their creative desires. How do you maintain this balance and make sure your games are yours instead of, wanting to come out from a business objective?
Well, honestly, there are only 24 hours in a day, and if I could, I would love to use all those 24 hours as creative time, creating a game. But I think in order to create something great, something truly great, you have to create the environment that allows you to create freely. And in order to accomplish that, I decided that I had to become a producer, and that becoming a producer would allow me to create the games that I want to create. So, prior to MGS1, I wasn't a producer, so I was very bound by, dates and budgets. I had no control over hiring people. I couldn't control the budget. A lot of times I didn't really know where the deadlines came from, so, I really didn't have that power to do it. So I think there may be a lot of people here in the audience who maybe want to produce a creative type of, occupation, whether it's games or something else. And I think if you have a great supportive producer there who can encourage you and bring that creativity out of you, that's great. But if there isn't a person like that, then I think really it's up to you to really take the leadership, go out there and become a producer yourself. So, but then of course, in order to become a producer and maintain your position as a producer, you have to know business. And you have to look at the business aspects, keep multiple lines of things running at once. You have to be very organized, keep track of the budgets and whatnot. So I think it's very important to have that skill. But, what I want to emphasize though is that role as a producer, that's only to facilitate creativity. So creativity and creation is always priority number one. Then I become a producer to support that creative endeavor. In order to support my role as producer, I have to study business. But priority is always on.
In 2006, you likened your role as a game designer as to someone who runs a museum. Your game, acting as that museum, contains the art that you create, lighting, the placement of objects, but the video game itself is not art, as art should radiate the designer. I believe that video games are an art form due to the three voices that are present when games become art through the author, the game mechanics, and the player themselves. Do you still share the same position that you did in 2006?
So, I can't come here to the Smithsonian and just come right out and say, oh, hey, it's not art. But, I will say that, here at the Smithsonian, it's a very large museum. There are many museums, dedicated to technology, artistic endeavors, music, and a lot of different things. So from that perspective, I think games really do have a place. And it's kind of a collaborative art, or a synthesis of all these various aspects into a whole. And that in itself can be perceived as art. But, one contradiction that I would like to point out, or one contrasting point, is that in traditional art, painters can, say, do a portrait and basically push their views on the viewer, right? Like, say if he painted something that looked like a banana but said, hey, no, this is an apple. Well, really, as the viewer, you have no control over that. The painter has total control over what they're showing to the viewer, and that's, I think, what art has been up to this point. But for games, you can't really do that because it's interactive, right? And so if you take the example of a car, people are used to driving a car with a round steering wheel. But if you were to suddenly change that to a triangular steering wheel, I think people would have a really hard time driving. So I think, as somebody who's creating a game, you have to keep that interactivity in mind, and you can't completely push your vision on the player. So I think, the basis of game design and our goal is to take all these various arts, whether it be, visual arts or music or technology. And as a game designer, I think it's my job to kind of take all these various arts, combine it into a whole, and present that to the player as a service. So, and then, then there's the last step as well, where once the player gets involved, then they also become a part of that interactive process, and they become a part of that art. So I guess, from a certain perspective, yes, I guess you could say it is art, but it's not traditional art in the traditional sense. It's a sort of interactive art.
If you had to pick one greatest hope for the future of video games, will video games continue to be a significant role culturally in society?
So, of course, I don't know what the future holds, but I believe that interactive entertainment will not go away. I think, there will always be that need for that type of entertainment. And of course, technology is always evolving. So I think as long as technology keeps on evolving, interactive entertainment will also evolve with the technology and become something better at every step of the way. But then in addition to that, that evolutionary step of technology, I believe that it'll also become much wider in society. It'll impact a lot more areas of society. So we'll use it in things like maybe medical science or various other parts of our daily lives. And I think, so, games will become much more important, not just among the game community, but across a much wider audience. And so I guess you could say that, games could kind of serve as a testing ground for a lot of technologies that could later on become very useful in fields of medical science or education or other critical social services. So I think really from that perspective, games are a very important part of our future, and I think the future is very bright. And as an example of that, there's the Kinect, which I think probably many of you may have at your own homes. And it's first introduced as a part of a game experience, but I think maybe in 5 to 10 years we'll be using that type of interaction with a lot of other things besides games. So in a certain way, games are kind of like at the cutting edge of technology and introducing people to these new technologies that'll be a part of our daily lives in the future.